friends, welcome back to Food Prep Guide. We are back in the kitchen today with another canning project. Today is canning ground meat. Now I am canning ground venison, and I'll share my tips for making it taste more like ground beef and getting that wild gamey taste out of it. But as far as canning goes, the process for canning ground meat is the same no matter whether you're doing beef, ground chicken, ground venison, whatever. When I am canning, I am usually wanting to do a full canner load. My canner, that's 8 regular mouth pints, and that means I need about 7 to 8 pounds of meat. And because of that large volume, I do it in a roaster. I find that browning it at the 250 degree to 275 degree setting on a roaster is perfect. It does go slower when you're browning in a roaster, but that's great for me because I'm normally having to do these canning projects in the morning while I'm homeschooling, so I'm constantly having to step away and teach a lesson or read a book or fix a math problem or something like that. So I just wanted to share this roaster idea in case any of you are out there like me trying to fix in these food preservation projects in the nooks and crannies of life without having to dedicate a whole day or a whole week into it. This is one way that makes that a little bit easier. And since you are usually canning in a larger batch, you don't have to break up all those batches into different skillets, because most of us probably don't have a skillet big enough to ground 10 pounds of meat at a time. So the roaster is fantastic for that. So the number one thing to know when you are browning your meat for canning is that you don't cook it all the way. You only brown it about 80% of the way through. I have just reached that point, and I wanted to try to get a close-up of the meat. So let me show you that real quick. Okay, here we are. I just wanted to show you what that 80% process looks like. At first glance, everything looks pretty brown. But if we get in here with our little tool here and start breaking it up really good, we can see that there are chunks of pink still. Here's one right here. There's a big chunk of pink. Let's see, there's one right here. Pretty good sized chunk of pink. And so that's what you want. You want to be able to look at it and see mostly brown. But then when you start digging in here and getting it ground up and kind of moving it around, and you can still see pieces of pink. Here's some right here. There's some right there. And this is about the consistency, not consistency, but the browning level that you want for canning. So real quick, the first step when I'm trying to get the gamey taste out of wild venison is at this point when I'm browning it, I put in some Old Bay seasoning. I don't measure, I just use the sprinkle lid, and I sprinkle, I just cover the top with the Old Bay seasoning. It's probably not even a full tablespoon if I had to guess what the measurement would be. So that's the first step, sprinkling a layer of Old Bay seasoning on. At this point, the meat is 80% done and we're ready to can. So if you're using a traditional pressure canner on your stovetop, you want to get your jars already hot at this point. Since we are pressure canning for longer than 10 minutes, we don't need to sterilize our lids or jars, but we do want them nice and clean and nice and hot. So I'm going to get my canner set up and we'll be back in just a minute. Okay, we are ready to can. My canner has a built-in warming jar feature. It just beeped to let me know that it's ready. If you're using a traditional pressure canner, just go ahead and have those jars hot, just heating up in your pressure canner or even in a separate stock pot heating up. Let's talk about everything that there is, the whole setup here before I take those hot jars out. When canning ground meat or anytime you're canning a hot substance, it's really important to put hot food in hot jars so that your jars don't experience a shock and potentially shatter. So I'm not going to take my hot jars out just yet. I'm going to explain everything that I have here. I have a jar lifter to get those hot jars out, a canning funnel, a debubble tool, our seasoning, which we'll talk about in just a second, a kettle of boiling water, our pot of lids and rings. I have recently reverted back to heating up my lids and rings because I started experiencing seal failures, and I found that heating up those seals really does help. You don't want them boiling, but hot water just under boiling. A pair of tongs to get pull those lids and rings out. And then just off camera over here, I have my pot of meat that I just pulled out of my roaster and a slotted spoon. The reason why you want a slotted spoon is because when you're canning ground meat, you want to strain out as much of the grease as possible. Okay, I think I'm about ready to take my jars out. Let me get you set up here so you can see pretty good. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and take my lid off to get my jars out. I have to preheat my jars in this canner with water in them, so I'm just gonna pour this water out real quick. Okay, first thing that goes in is our seasoning. I always can ground venison and ground beef with beef broth powder by Orrington Farms. I put 1 teaspoon in per pint jar. If I were canning in quarts, I would do 2 teaspoons. So 1 teaspoon of this beef broth. This is the key to making canned venison taste like ground beef. It really does just taste very, very similar to beef when it's done this way. But if you just want to use salt, you can. If you want to use Old Bay seasoning, you can. There's a lot of liberty as far as how you want to season your meat goes when it comes to canning. Okay, next we are going to scoop in our beef. That's a new one. Okay, I'm going to, I don't know if you can see, but I'm just going to be scooping the meat and allowing it to strain as much of the liquid out as possible before I scoop it into my can. It's okay if a little bit gets in there. You don't have to worry about getting every drop of grease out. And we're going to be filling this with up to a 1-inch headspace. If you would like to use a tool like the debubble tool that has the inch marks on it, you can use that. But a good rule of thumb is this little bottom ring right here, that's 1 inch. That's a 1-inch headspace, so that's what I'm going to be doing. We don't want to stuff the jars. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my debubble tool and I'm going to pat it down a little bit, but I'm not going to be cramming it down. I'm just going to pat it down a little bit and see where we're at. And that is a 1-inch headspace right there. So next step is to pour in boiling water, again up to a 1-inch headspace. I'm going to do it slowly because as those bubbles kind of release, it gets a little bit lower. I'm going to go in with my debubble tool again, and I'm going to press down the sides to get all the bubbles out, and then I'm going to check my level one more time and see if we still have a 1-inch headspace, and we do. Next, we need to wipe down the rims with a damp rag with water, which I need to get real quick. The jar is pretty hot, so just be careful. Wiping that rim good. Then I'm going to use my tongs, get a hot lid out, place that on the jar, and these lids are really hot. Get a ring. And then we're going to shut the ring to finger tight, which means we're going to shut it until we start feeling resistance, and then one more quarter turn. And then it's ready to go into the canner. Let's do one more, and then I'll bring you back when I've got all the jars done and we're moving on to the next step. Okay, so meat. Straining out as much of that grease as possible. Pressing it down gently to see if we're good. Looks good. Let's pour in boiling water to 1-inch headspace. And then debubble, which means we're just raking it down the sides of the jar. And then take our funnel out and see if we still have 1-inch headspace. I'm a little bit above 1-inch headspace, so I'm going to take out just a little bit of water. The headspace is very important to getting a good seal on your jar. I poured that in a little bit too fast, and that's why I think the first jar I did, I was like, do this really slowly because you don't want to go over that 1-inch headspace mark. But anyway, next is lids. Sometimes they like to stick together in this water good. Whoops, I forgot to wipe my rim. That's really important too. Okay, wiping the rim. I noticed because I saw a chunk of meat there. If you don't wipe your rims good, that's also a recipe for not getting a good seal. Okay, we wiped our rims. Now a lid. Hot. And a ring. Turning it to finger tight. And loading it into the canner. Okay, we have the last jar going in. At this point, all ground meat, no matter what type it is, needs to pressure cook at 10 pounds of pressure, 75 minutes for pints, and 90 minutes for quarts. We're doing pints, so I'm going to pressure cook this at 75 minutes. This digital pressure canner I don't need to adjust the pressure, but if you're using a pressure canner on your stovetop, you're going to be processing it at 10 pounds of pressure. If you would like a step-by-step walkthrough of how this particular canner, works, we have a video on canning shredded chicken, I believe it is, and I walk you through, I'll link that above, and I walk you through exactly how to use this canner. But at this point, I'm just putting the lid on, locking it. I'm not putting my pressure regulator on. It needs to come up to pressure first. And once I lock this mechanism and hit that next button, at this point, we just let the pressure canner do its thing. The next step, once it's all processed, is to remove your jars and set them in a place where you cannot touch them for 12 to 24 hours. Sometimes I do that in the floor in my dining room, sometimes on my countertop. If you're going to be setting your jars on the countertop, make sure you lay down a towel because you don't want those boiling hot jars directly on your countertop because it could ruin your counter. But wherever you set them, you just don't want to touch them for 12 to 24 hours, and that's because you want to give that lid time to seal completely without any outside influences making it seal, which could result in a false seal. And then after 12 to 24 hours, I'll come through with a wet rag and I'll clean off the jars. They may have gotten a little greasy or just a little dirty in the canner, and label them and then put them on the shelf, and we're done. I will add a picture of the finished product at the end of this video. Hope y'all enjoy. Remember, if you're interested in learning step-by-step how to use this particular canner, which is a Presto digital canner, check out that shredded chicken tutorial linked above. Okay guys, hope y'all enjoy.